2016, the year we all thought would be the worst one and that now we wish we could go back to. Meet Your Match comes out to roaring fanfare and introduces us to an official, Valve-endorsed competitive TF2 mode, and it sucks. It just sucks. It stays untouched, sucking for an entire year and then some, before Blue Moon comes along and finally updates it, giving it a much-needed facelift, adding placement matches, new ranks, real matchmaking, and it still sucks. But the question is why? Why does it suck so bad? Well, if you've played it, you know the answer to that. But for those of you who haven't dipped their toes into this excuse for competitive TF2, let me save you the trip and prevent this from being your first exposure to the 6v6 format. Let's start off with just about everyone's experience with Valve Comp at one point or another. You queue up for Valve Comp, wait anywhere from half an hour until the end of time to get into a match, you finally get in. Oh my fucking god! We did it! We found a competitive match after like 3 hours of searching. Holy shit, dude. Someone on the other team fails to connect, and the game's cancelled, and you're spat back out to the queue. Repeat until you finally get into an actual game, which is essentially nothing more than a 6v6 version of casual, even down to the map pool, with no shotgun bloom or random crits, and that's about the only positive I have to say about it. So, let's break this experience down. The queue times are obviously too long. However, this is a result of the small player count more than anything. This is something I find kind of funny, because I'll see people who despise the very existence of competitive as a concept take a look at the low player count of Valve Comp and smugly claim that there's no interest in the format because of that, when really it's just that the official integration of this format is dreadful. Confirmation bias is a hell of a drug. Anyway, on top of the low player count, when your rank gets too high, it gets harder and harder to find any matches at all, because the matchmaking system tries to even out the skill level in roughly the same way I imagine casual does. Have you ever been in a casual game where you're the only person on your team without a silver badge, while everyone else on the enemy team is at least competent? Of course you fucking have. Well, competitive is the exact same way by design. Next, let's talk about one of the worst aspects of Valve Comp that is severely underrated in just how detrimental it is to this game mode survival. Have you ever wondered why in nearly every game you get into, someone isn't able to connect and so the match is cancelled before it even starts? Well, that's because Valve Comp has graphical requirements. Valve Comp, suddenly, without warning, jacks up the graphical requirements like a motherfucker to keep everyone on an even playing field, when all this really does is completely kneecap people with low-end systems who are probably playing this game in the first place specifically because they're on a low-end system. If people wanted to have their CPUs overheat, they'd fucking microwave them, not play a 13-year-old game. That's usually something they'd play on to avoid graphical overload. But Valve Comp, for no real reason, demands your system to work its absolute hardest and will undoubtedly fuck with your performance, and in many cases will cause the game to hard crash because your system can't handle the sudden, unexpected jump in graphics quality. All it takes is for this to happen to one person who plays on a low-end system to completely ruin the match and send you back to the menu screen. And of course this only happens because unlike even pickup games, there is no subsystem for Valve Comp. One player leaves and that's it, match is over. This needs to go away, especially considering there's no precedent for this in community competitive. In fact, you'll often see the opposite in effect. Plenty of competitive players will intentionally make their games look like garbage to get the best performance possible, because your frame rate matters in a competitive FPS game, shockingly enough. You not only make the game harder for many people by doing this, but actively unplayable for others. So get rid of this at all cost. And while you're at it, just add a fucking subsystem already. You already have the matchmaking system to support this, and the bots to act as a spare player during the downtime it takes to get someone in the game. Just do that. This graphical requirement nonsense is the kind of thing that would be fine for a LAN tournament, where all the PCs are provided to the players and can run just as fast as they need to, but for a pick up and play at any time competitive mode, this just can't stay this way. Especially when the punishment for failing to have the game run well can be so disastrous and time wasting. Okay, that's a big one out of the way. With this garbage removed, everyone who wants to can now actually play competitive. What's next? Well, the balance. On top of many banned weapons still being unchanged and unbanned, the biggest issue is the lack of class limits. Now here's the thing, I would never, ever dream of putting class limits in casual. As much as I hate fighting against a wall of snipers, a mass of heavies on the cart, or a battalion of engineers, everyone class stacking at once and having class wars is a rare but incredibly fun part of casual that shouldn't just be restricted to community silly servers. For as many games that I've been which were utterly ruined by a sentient wall of Russian flesh, with multiple medics shoved up their asses never ceasing to hump the shit out of the payload cart, I wouldn't trade those for the games where everyone goes spy or SMG sniper. But in competitive, making that trade is absolutely necessary. Having even just 2 of certain classes like Demo Man, Medic, or Heavy in an environment with only 6 players on each team can make games not only incredibly imbalanced, but incredibly slow, frustrating, and tedious. Some solutions to this have been thrown around, like making Valve Comp into a 6v6 Pro Lantern with a 1 class limit for everyone, or simply implementing the currently existing class limits that Community Competitive uses now. I think either option could work, but no matter which route you go down, it raises another issue of, what if you want to switch classes with someone else? Like, you're sucking shit as Demo, so you want to swap with someone else, or someone else is sucking shit as Demo, so you want to give it a shot. With class limits, you can't just take matters into your own hands unless the other party willingly gives up their position on the class. My suggestion for this would be a swap request system. It would work kind of like old auto balance, which they got rid of for some reason, except instead of being automated by the server, it would be a request sent by the player. You click the class that's currently been limited in the class select screen, and it sends a message to the other player asking if they want to swap, and if they accept, this will occur the next time both of you die and respawn. If they decline, everything stays as is, and you just have to live with the fact that you're not as good as clicking followed by right-clicking as you could be. Of course, if you're in communication with your team, this process is a lot easier and more streamlined, but this way lets you do this even if you're solo queuing. Next up on the balance roster is weapon balances. Now this is tricky, because we've seen Valve balancing weapons for the sake of competitive players, and for the sake of casual players several times now, and they're not the best at it. One very easy solution is just to implement a ban list, so weapons that are banned by Community Comp are banned by Valve Comp. Easy band-aid solution. Keeps weapons that are balanced in casual still usable, and keeps weapons that are imbalanced in comp out of the picture. Another solution would be to have comp-balanced versions of weapons that only function in a certain way in competitive. I could see this being pretty unintuitive and confusing though. Imagine not being the most experienced player, and suddenly finding out that your quick fix has completely different functionality now that you don't have nearly enough time or practice to get a proper grasp on before your shit gets pushed in. You could also do what some Pro-Lander matches do and have both teams decide a roster of weapons that will be banned for both sides, but I can see some griefing potential with this if the weapon list encompasses all weapons in the game and not just a selection of unlocks. Not to mention this would be difficult to implement with just how many unlocks there are, and for solo queuers I can see this being frustrating. So the last solution is just to balance all the weapons and classes in the game to be both fun to use in casual and also viable and balanced for competitive, which... that's not gonna fucking happen. Yeah, we can keep dreaming on that one. We live in a society. But if all of this was fixed and worked perfectly, would Valve Comp finally be where it should be? Well, still not really. One issue that remains is the map pool. Now you might think that I'm going to criticize Valve's addition of maps outside of 5CP, but no, this is totally fine. Many people are hesitant to try out the 6v6 format because they don't care for the 5CP game mode and the stale 2 scouts, 2 soldiers, demo, and medic meta, and adding more maps and game modes fixes both of these issues, as certain classes like Engineer are far more viable on game modes like Attack Defend, and classes like Sniper and Heavy are far more viable on game modes like Payload. These classes do slow the game down, but when the entire point of one team is to halt the progress of the enemy team, then all that means is they're doing their job. Unlike in 5CP where you turtle last until the enemy gets their Uber, Then you try to deny that Uber while pushing in with your own once theirs runs out, and if that doesn't happen because you can't make a push since most of your team got wiped out in their Uber push, then you end up in the 5CP stalemate loop of hell. While the symmetry of 5CP is nice for generalist classes, I think the fact that it's one of the few game modes that can theoretically go on forever is not so great for a competitive format. Looking at you, Capture the Flag. No! It's Turbine! Adding game modes with dedicated timers and defending teams completely eliminates any chance of a stalemate. However, it's important to pick the right maps. Swiftwater is a good map, I like it a lot, but it's way too long for only having 12 people on the server. It's a Highlander staple, sure, but Highlander and Sixes are two very different game modes. The classics like Badwater and Upward do the job fairly well. There is also a case to be made for multi-stage payload maps, like Gold Rush, Enclosure, and Thunder Mountain. Because these take place in more bite-sized mini-maps, there's the potential for games to go by very quickly. But because the maps are so massive when they're all strung together, there's also the chance that they can really drag on. It may honestly be best to pick a single mini-stage of these maps and just roll with that for your 6v6 game mode if they're the maps you want to go with. Hopefully whichever stage is the best balance. In other words, not Thunder Mountain first because fuck those sightlines, dude. Single stage payload is probably the best way to go overall. They just need to be picky about their map choices. Attack Defend is likewise best off sticking with the linear single stage maps like Gorge, Mountain Lab, Moss Rock, and Altitude. I think with only 6 people per team, larger maps like Steel or Gravel Pit wouldn't work out as well. And the multi-stage maps like Dust Bowl run into similar problems as the payload ones. They could either last a few minutes or maybe up to an hour depending on how evenly matched the teams are. Koth I feel is also underrepresented, just in general, so throw in some more of those too. Being a very even and static game mode, it's an area where a lot more classes are able to be viable. Also, just fucking get rid of CTF in competitive. It's not going to work, ever, with any map. Just stop it. Get some help. Also, this whole map Russian roulette system isn't really one I'm a fan of, especially when Turbine is in the pool. Son of a bitch! I think once you get matched with another team, everyone should vote for what map in the pool to play on, and if it's tied, then you can let RNG decide between the maps that got the most votes. This would probably lead to a free-thinking Uncletopia player situation where everyone just votes for the most popular maps, but I think that's a better alternative than everyone potentially ending up on a map that nobody likes. This could even be a great way to get player feedback on map choices without needing to do any actual surveys so they can see which maps to cull in future updates. There's also currently no incentive to play Valve Comp outside of the experience of playing with people who are actually trying, which hey, that's something, but it's only going to keep so many people sticking around. And a bit of that novelty is lost nowadays with Uncletopia being one of the more common ways to play the game. One thing I've noticed is, there's no team rankings, only individual player rankings. For a team game, this seems odd, especially when the competitive standard is relatively static teams with ringers for when a teammate can't make it. My thoughts on this are, there should be a way to set up a select number of players as being assigned to a team. And when they all play together, that match counts towards the team's rank as well as the individual players. You could also assign ringers into this roster so that you don't need to have all 6 of your main people in your team in order to rank up. This could let some people roster ride their way into rewards without ever having to play the game, but if you limit the number of ringers to say 6, 1 for each player, then I think that should be fine. Returning teams should also be able to swap players in and out of the team at the beginning of each season, just in case someone decides to quit. Anyway, on the subject of rewards, I think there should be prizes for each competitive season. How long a season goes on for, I can't really say. Probably a decently long time, a few months or so, just so you don't end up with an oversaturation of rewards. I think top ranking teams should get fairly unified rewards. Like, if your team ranks at the very top of the leaderboard, maybe the top 10% or something, everyone on the team gets a gold all-class crown, or cape, or something with a special unusual effect. And then the next group of players down would get a silver crown, next place a bronze, and then after that you might get a funny cardboard Burger King crown for the meme. Everyone who played in the season will get some kind of participation badge with a higher grade depending on their ranking, something like that. On top of this, keys, other tools like paint and MVM tickets, cosmetics, And maybe even rare weapons should be given out as well to individual players, with the quality being higher for a higher ranking. And I think all of these should be tradable. If you give people a real world monetary incentive to play the mode, they'll absolutely do it. I mean, hell, just take a look at MVM, and that shit doesn't even get updates. I think this could come in the form of keyless competitive crates that you unbox at the end of each season. Maybe there'll even be different grades depending on how high you ranked, so that if the crates themselves are tradable, people who buy them know what they're getting into. So basically, teams all get the same thing as a baseline along with each individual player in a team, or even those without teams, getting a crate that gives them random, personalized loot based on their ranking. Now sure, some people will end up playing comp just for the loot, but they're still getting good at the game in the process, and even if the motivation is perhaps a bit skewed, isn't that what it's all about? I mean, you can't tell me that people who play in esports tournaments are there just for the fun of it, when there's often a prize pool of cash at the end of the rainbow. If Valve actually bothered to host some of these for TF2, then I wouldn't need to come up with this convoluted prize system, but hey, what can you do? I may as well suggest that they start doing that, considering it's just about as likely as anything else I've suggested. The biggest issue with this system is that it would encourage a lot of cheating, which Valve comp, and honestly even plenty of community comp, has had a problem with. And Valve's response to the existence of cheaters has been lacking, to say the least. So that's definitely a real concern. But anyway, that's about it. If this version of Valve Comp existed, and bots and cheaters couldn't find a way to fucking ruin it, then I would play the absolute shit out of it. And I think when players were asking for a competitive mode, it's the kind of thing they were expecting. Not 6v6 casual with no random crits and shotgun bloom, but something that incentivizes people to get good and try their hardest to win. You know, a competition. This is hardly one of the more pressing things to complain about at this time, but you know, it's still worth complaining about. If you want to dip your toes into competitive, I'd recommend community competitive. Something like TF2 Center or Pickup Game Discord servers. Those are a really good place to start out for beginners. Just avoid Valve Comp at all costs unless you just want to feel depressed, because Valve Comp is a complete joke. Oh my god, I shot him. I shot that man and he died. Oh my god. We can stop the bleeding. We can save him. We can save him. Oh, he's gone. Oh my god, you're bleeding. We can stop the bleeding. No! Everyone's dying around me!